Hello and welcome to the Life After Diets podcast. I'm Sarah Dosanjh, psychotherapist and author of the book, I Can't Stop Eating.
And I'm Stefanie Michele, binge recovery health coach. If you feel out of control around food, we get it because we've been there.
Thank you for joining our conversations about how to make peace with food and feel more comfortable in our bodies.
Now on to this week's episode. Before we begin, Sarah and I just wanted to thank everybody who's been listening in and writing in and letting us know what you think about the podcast and how it's been helping you. And we wanted to connect back with our audience. So we have decided to move forward with an event that would like to invite everybody to so that we can get to know each other on a more intimate level and talk about your questions in a live format. And I'm going to let Sarah let you know what that's going to look like.
So what we've come up with is an online community question and answer live Zoom. And we thought a really good time to do this would be just before the holidays, because that can be a really tricky time. But if you're struggling with food, with a lot of food anxiety and having to deal with families and social situations. So we gave it some thought and we came up with the idea of doing an online community live Q&A session on Zoom. And so this is going to be on the 19th of December, 2021. Of course, as you guys probably know, Steph and I are in different time zones. So in the UK, it's going to be 5 p.m. till 7 p.m. And Steph, do you want to fill us in with the US times?
Yeah, sure. So Eastern time, it's going to be noon to 2 p.m. Hopefully, wherever you are, you'll be able to join in and ask your questions or just listen to other people's questions and hear the answers and just get some community feeling around this time of year, and also to get some of your questions answered in a live back and forth way.
If you want to sign up to the event and come and meet us, then please go to the link below. We want to make sure that this is affordable and accessible for people who want to come. So there is an option to pay whatever you can afford. One of the reasons why we do what we do is because it's about community and it's about feeling less alone when you are struggling with these kinds of problems around food and body image. So bringing people together is what we are all about. We really look forward to meeting some of you in December. If you are listening to this in the future, please do look out for future events, because this is something that if this one goes well, I'm sure we will want to do more of them. Anyway, we've taken enough of your time. Let's just get on with the episode.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stefanie, and welcome to this episode of Life After Diets. Hi, Sarah. Today, we are talking about who am I without dieting? We're going to look into what our identity even is when we've spent so much of it focused on dieting and weight control and perhaps even exercise, and what happens when that pursuit is gone. What's left, what remains, and how do we navigate that? So, is this something you felt for yourself, Sarah? Like, did you go through the process of recovery and land in any sort of confusion about that? Or was it a natural evolution, or did you feel it at all?
I think during that decade of my eating disorders, recovery was my purpose. That was my goal in life. That was the problem. My eating was, and my body image was, well, I didn't think it was my body image. I thought it was my body, of course. My eating and my body was the problem I needed to fix. So therefore, it took so much time, so much energy, so much emotional energy, mental energy, all of that. And there wasn't a lot of space for other things. And I think when that goes on for a period of time, I don't think it even needs to go on for that long until it just starts to become part of your identity of who you are and how you see yourself. I am someone who has binge eating disorder, has bulimia. I am someone who struggles with food. I am someone who, I believe, needs to lose weight. All of those things became these labels. I'm also someone who keeps failing at this.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a big part of it as well. And the more entrenched I got in the problem, the more convinced I became that my goal was to get to the other side of it, because then when I arrived there, I've arrived. We've touched on this before, this idea that there's this place that we're trying to get to. So it was so compelling, that image of me, because this was such a big problem that once it was gone, life was going to be easy.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I think I was expecting, but it was probably gradual. It wasn't as if I recovered and then suddenly life wasn't easy and I'm surprised by that. That was a discovery that came in the process. And I would say recovery is an ongoing process as well. that was where I found that to be the case. And yeah, it was kind of disappointing, to be honest.
It was? Well,
Mm.
in what way? How?
Because for years you're convinced that you're gonna eventually get to this place where you are more confident, more attractive, more in control. You're this disciplined, got your act together kind of person. And I believed that
Mm,
that was possible. I believed that that's what I was working towards. So part of that process of letting that go did involve asking this question, like, who am I
yeah,
without this problem? Because what I thought was true was actually just this unrealistic
yeah,
dream, I think.
yeah. I can understand the grief in that. I mean, I certainly understand it. As you were talking, I was thinking about how the binge and restrict cycle in particular feels like, I'll speak for myself. It felt like two parts of my identity, one that I was running away from and one that I was desperate to be.
Mm,
And I think that the binging kept showing up because it needed to not be hidden. It's like the shadow side of yourself versus the presentable side of yourself. And there's something in the binges that are asking for you to recognize the parts of yourself that are there. For example, my binge eating reminded me of the part of myself that is spontaneous, and I didn't think that was good in any way. And impulsive. I guess impulsive is a better word. Impulsive. Out of control, scared, non-compliant.
mhm,
And the restrictive side of myself was my put together, like disciplined, orderly, and also something about the mood of that, like my internal sense, not just how I was presenting to others, but also how I felt, like my stable side, even though it wasn't. But
mhm,
it felt like the representation of that. So when these parts of yourself go away, in particular the one you want to present, the lighter side, when when that's off the table as your representative, it's vulnerable because it feels like, well, that's how I was proving the good side of myself. That's how I was proving that I really am this good part. And now I'm left with the side of me that just feels like a mess, the things that come up in my mind are like the things we're told about ourselves as, if we're creative kids, or if we're emotional kids, that like this becomes, you're too much, you're too this, you're too that, you're flighty, you're this. I'm using my own adjectives, but like, that these are the stories we get about ourselves that we hear as this is not a good thing about me. And it feels like, well, now you've just taken away the promise of me fixing those things, because that dieting side and the body I was going to land in after I finished dieting finally was going to be the alternative self. It was going to be the side of myself that shows everyone that I'm not these bad things and that I'm these admirable things. And when that gets taken away, then you're like, well, how am I going to prove that now? How am I going to show the world that I'm not these other things?
uh-huh. I relate to that so hard. I think that comes up so much with this. I thought that the job was to get rid of this out of control part of me. Like that was my job, was to get rid of her, to destroy her. And I really saw particularly the binge side of me as separate to me, that it was some kind of I don't know, demon sounds like a not quite the right word I would use, but at times it felt almost like another separate entity to me, that I could feel it. I could feel it there. And it felt so malevolent and so destructive. There was so much terror for me actually in turning and confronting that part of me. What does it mean that this part exists within me? And instead, actually figuring out how to have some compassion for that part felt so counterintuitive for a long time, because I didn't want to go down that route, because to have compassion for that part means to offer it some kind of acceptance, when it felt like
Yeah.
there was no redeeming qualities at all to the part of me that wanted to binge. As I started to understand more about binging and understand more about my triggers, and I could see it, and as my realizations developed, that this was an attempt at taking care of myself, even though it felt like self-sabotage, even though there were times where I felt so unwell and so miserable, it was trying to take care of me. Once I saw that part of it, that I think was the point where I could kind of go like, okay, this is like a misguided,
Yeah.
lost part of me. It wasn't always
Yeah.
misguided. That was how I started thinking of it. And that helped me to start to bring it a bit closer, because it was like the more I pushed it away, the more aggressively it came back towards me. And actually, when I was kind of like, okay, I'm going to have a little look at you, you can come a bit closer, and I'm going to try and see what's in here
Mhm.
from like a safe reactive distance if I can. That helped. That really did help in figuring out how to integrate, because I think of it as integrating different parts
Yeah.
to give us a more cohesive sense of who we are, because we think we're one thing or the other. We want to put labels on who we are as people, but actually we're lots of things. So I am very generous. I am also selfish. I am contradictions. I have different parts of me that are active at different times. And it doesn't mean that they are less real, just
Right.
because maybe some days I'm in touch with that part and maybe some days I'm in touch with another part, because that's how it felt. It felt like when I was in each state that the other part didn't really exist. When I was feeling great and I was in that high kind of place, I'm just going to hold myself here, and I'm not going to allow that state to exist. And then when I was in that sort of binging, depressed, low state, it felt like, oh no, this is who I really am, and that high is the illusion, and that
Yeah.
swing is part of the chaos that
Yeah.
I experienced.
Yes. And that reminds me of the black and white episode, or the all or nothing episode too, where it's like you embody one personality,
Mhm.
aspect of your personality, or another. And that they both feel pretty permanent when you're inside of it. I feel like it's interesting that you talk about the binge side of you as something different. I felt like that was the real me. I felt like the binge side of me was like the real me, and people were going to figure that out. And that I needed to get rid of that side of me because it was despicable. And I couldn't. It's interesting now as I'm thinking back to how I described it a few minutes ago, where I called it spontaneous first and then I changed it to impulsive, because I grew up thinking that my impulsivity, and this wasn't even necessarily taught to me, it was something I somehow believed about myself, that my impulsivity was bad, because it did get me into trouble a bunch of times. Like it made me make bad decisions. Sorry, I'm saying it made me. It didn't make me. I made bad decisions, and impulsively. And I was very bought into that side of myself being bad. And I think that it made the decisions even, it made me just like go all in again with this all or nothing. I think that's why it led me there. And in fact, what ended up happening with taking the route of compassion is that I started to be able to see all of these negative, quote unquote, negative traits about myself as just the way the light was hitting it. Like if I looked at it through this lens, sure, it was impulsive and reckless. But if you look at it through a different lens, if you just turn it around a little bit, it's spontaneous, which can be good. It's fun. It can be, there's something I like about that. And it was about looking at all of these qualities of myself that I was desperate to hide or cover up, and seeing them as part of me in their both in their shame and their glory. It was like there's ways of looking. It almost reminds me of Enneagram. Did you ever take the Enneagram test?
Oh, I think so. I'm struggling to remember now, but I think
It's like
yes. Is it the ENFP?
no, it's the Enneagrams. There's like there's not. It's like the numbers. I think I don't know, there's 9, 8. I forget. I'm not a big
Maybe not.
Enneagram person. I know some people are very, very into it. Um, but basically, and if anyone listening knows more about this than me, you can correct me if I'm wrong. But the part of the theory of it is that it is a personality test, and you get this number, based on your answers to your questions. You become this number, but you're not only that number, you have wings of other numbers. And when you're thriving, you lean towards a different number. And when you're counterproductive mode, you lean towards another number. But each number has it's what I'm just describing. It's like it has like aspects of its personality that can be, for lack of a better term, like bad or good. But there's ways that it can be productive or non-productive. And I started to see those personality traits I'd always wanted to cover up as I spun them a little differently. And I still do that because it's through my own process of recovering. It's not like I got rid of these things about myself. It's not like I learned how to make them go away. I just understood them, and I embrace the parts of me that might be spontaneous over reckless, by recognizing that I have a tendency to be reckless sometimes. And it's all part of me, and it's not bad or good. None of it's bad or good. I think dieting used as a way of either expressing an identity or covering up parts of our identity. It doesn't have to be that black and white way of you're either this thing or this thing, and dieting represents this part of you and binging represents this part of you. It's like it's all still part of you. You're still these things. You still might be a disciplined person, and you still might have moments where you feel out of control. It doesn't have to be either or, and we don't have to put it in these boxes, and we don't have to let dieting be, or our body shape be, the representative of these things about us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It made me think about purpose when you were talking, and how dieting gives us a purpose in life. Purpose is so important. Like, purpose brings meaning. We can endure a lot if we think there's a purpose to it. Take childbirth, for example, as you can attest to. Like, you endure that incredibly intense pain, but there's a purpose behind it. So you accept it. You go into this going like, okay, I can do that, compared to if you were to just experience that pain for no purpose, no proper reason. That's going to be a very different experience. I'm thinking now about people who might feel very distressed in their body, very uncomfortable in their body, that at least if they are dieting and trying to fix it, there's a sense of purpose and a sense of hope. And by giving that up, it may feel like I'm just going to feel uncomfortable and in pain, and for what? Like, what's my purpose now? I'm just living a life of pain, and that's the very all or nothing black and white thinking. But I think that's where some people are going to go to, or might be vulnerable to finding themselves in that place.
I like that point. I hear a lot about, well, it also brings up the mediocrity thing too. Like, if there's not a purpose, if this is just it, is this good enough? Did it feel better to diet? Because that gave me purpose. It did. I mean, there's a reason why dieting is compelling. It's not only purpose, it's a sense of taking initiative. There can be a sense of empowerment about that, taking action on something and feeling in control. And it can be used as a way of getting things in line. And we've talked about boundaries before in their supportive way. And I think sometimes the effort to diet feels like that in the beginning. It feels like a way that we are trying to take care of ourselves. It feels like a productive boundary at first.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is a conversation worth getting into, because you can sort of stay stuck in that idea of like, why is it so bad then? And why, Sarah? Why is it so bad then? If dieting gives us if it gives us all these things that feel good and that we might need, why is it bad?
Is it? I think each person gets to ask that question for themselves. We just want to grab a moment of your time to let you know that we are now on YouTube. So if you can't wait for the next episode, we are going to be uploading the podcast onto our YouTube channel a day early. So please head over there and subscribe. We are Life After Diets Podcast on YouTube and on Instagram, and you can email the show lifeafterdietspodcast@gmail.com.
And if you're interested in working with me, Stefanie, I work with clients one-to-one, and I also am enrolling for a group program to work on intuitive eating foundations with a binge and emotional eating recovery lens. You can apply at www.imstefaniemichele.com/application.
And if you want to connect with me, Sarah, I am the Binge Eating Therapist on Instagram and YouTube, and my website is thebingeeatingtherapist.com. Now let's get back to the episode. For me, it was not that dieting was bad, it was the cost of dieting that was bad. And I don't even describe myself as anti-diet, I describe myself as non-diet, because if people want to go out there and adhere to a diet, and that brings them way more benefits than the cost of adhering to a diet, and that's what they choose for themselves, go ahead. I just want people to feel free and to have some peace and some sense of just being okay with their relationship with food and their bodies. That's all I want for anybody. With the purpose part of it, there's a lot of talk now about finding your purpose. What's my life's purpose? That's often a question. Why am I here? What's the meaning of me being here and existing and living this life? And I think that we can be quite vulnerable. Let's say from I can be quite vulnerable to thinking there's got to be this grand life purpose, like the one big thing, rather than that idea of purpose just being, what's my purpose today? What's my purpose in this moment? How do I live more purposefully in the moment by moment? Because that is actually what I think brings more satisfaction as someone who feels like I have a pretty big purpose. Like my job is also my passion, and I get to do something where I feel like I'm helping people and doing something worthwhile. That
Mm.
still doesn't protect me from existential despair and feeling like I don't have a place in the world. I thought it would. I thought, in fact, it's all coming together in my mind now. I thought that I'll do the recovery thing. I'll give up the idealized version of me because I'm going to have this big purpose about going out there and helping people in the world. And that's what will make me feel like enough. Like I'm doing, like I've
Mm.
somehow, when you talked about the idea of trying to prove yourself as good enough, I think I tried to put that onto my work and quickly discovered that that also doesn't work.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
haven't quite figured out why not, because it
I know.
should, right?
No, I did. Same. I have noticed so many parallels between this work and my body image and food work. Like the things you put on what the outcome is going to be. Now this work feels more meaningful to me, but it's still there's still expectations and beliefs that come into that. Like I'm like, oh, it's the same thoughts, different topic. Like, it's just like the same thing, which is so interesting and humbling. And I'm not unaware of it. I think that perhaps maybe this is what life is. Maybe we just keep going through this in different series of ways, and hopefully each time we evolve a little more, or we're serving in a greater way or something like that. I mean, certainly this feels better. I'd rather be doing it here than be doing it there. But that, yeah, this is maybe the human thing. And that's why I think dieting, you're right to say, not to take necessarily this anti approach, because dieting serves a need too. I think where the conversation gets interesting, though, is that dieting can become the means of expressing the identity or avoiding the identity or finding the purpose, that it ends up crowding out the opportunity to find that in more meaningful places. And not that we necessarily need to find a meaning or a purpose, but that to live more purposefully day to day, small moment to small moment, we need to be paying attention to a wider frontier of life, and that dieting makes it so narrow, and that it also covers up parts of ourselves, or it tries to hide parts of ourselves, and that's the place where I feel like, for me, dieting interrupted me. It interrupted my ability to be present in so many other areas of who I was, that it wasn't it ultimately, even though it gave me feelings momentarily in the short term of the control or the purpose, that in the long term, it was taking those things actually away from me.
Mhm. What do you mean when you say that dieting was hiding parts of yourself?
So when I was desperate to escape the sides of myself that I felt were shameful, so I thought that by dieting it was that effort. It was my apology. It was like I'm I'm trying to not be out of control or impulsive or emotional. Dieting was the effort to fix all that and to make
Mhm.
it look more aligned and to get back on track and to be in control. And so it was denying the other parts of me that are real and that show up for me daily. And it's still a part of me. And like this effort to erase it is what dieting felt like it was trying to do. It was trying to make me be something else. And that's all tied in together.
Yeah. When you talk about it playing out in other areas, and you mentioned originally spontaneous and then impulsive, I was always very impulsive with my spending before I struggled with food. I was always careful, as in not getting into debt, but every penny I had to spend it. That's
Mm.
always been my pattern for a long time. And I used to I suppose, try and ignore that part of me because I didn't want to look at that. I want to be able to spend my money and be free
Yeah.
to spend my money, and it's fine. I don't have thousands of debt. It's okay. And it was an interesting, when you just about like parallels with parts of your life. One of the things that I started to do was one around putting money straight into savings the moment I got it. So once a month, that felt like a boundary that was then taken care of. I always put that much aside, and then the rest I can spend. There was something permissive in that. And also now when it comes to a bigger purchase or something that I want to buy and I'm not sure, I do the whole leave it. And if you still want it, you can come back and get it. And I just realized when you talk about parallels and impulsivity, the spending came into my mind, and I thought, oh, that's exactly what I say to myself with food. Sometimes when I'm not sure whether a desire for food is like what I want to be doing in that moment or not, I'll be like, leave it. And if it's half an hour, 20 minutes, you still want it, go and have it. And yeah, just maybe.
In all sorts of ways. I think the difference is that, like, with money or other things, like food is different because there's a biological and physiological, there's something and psychological, but that could, I guess, apply to money too. But with food, there's a biology you might or might not be fighting, whereas with other areas of life, that isn't there. So you can just really approach that from a psychological point of view. But that nonetheless, there's patterns that we're obviously looking to play out somehow. Yeah.
I never lived it down at work when there was one day where I just decided I needed a new car. And so I went out on my lunch break and bought one on my lunch break, a brand new car.
I shouldn't laugh because I could totally relate to that.
And I did not live that just used to, went down in law as something that Sarah did on her lunch break just in that moment. And yeah. And that was an interesting one, because actually it was a purchase that I regretted doing as spontaneously as I had. There was much better ways I could have gone about doing that. So I know that's something I can do. I can become quite fixated on something. Once I become fixated on it, I'm like, I need to have this, or I need to make this happen if it's something I'm going to make happen. I remember I used to do that with food. I'd become fixated on certain foods during certain cycles. There'd be particular foods that I would eat a lot of in binges, and then it would be something else that I would fixate on. And I've done it with purchases before as well, which is why I have to, for me, I need to create that gap. I just need to do that. And I did a post recently about keeping foods in the house. So I always make sure that I've got some foods in the house that are what might have been old binge foods as such. But I'm not someone who keeps a cupboard full of those foods, because sometimes I just need that gap. I genuinely have full permission to go and get it. And I live by a high street, so I can get anything I want within 2 minutes. But I need to create a bit of space for me to find my mind in that, because I know that pattern in myself, and that pattern hasn't gone anywhere despite the giving up dieting, despite the work on food and body image.
Like you gave yourself the pause space rather than it's the impulsivity, because there can be a tendency to just go. But
I have to remind myself that just because in that moment I think it's life or death to have that thing, am I still going to feel that way if with a purchase, if I give it another day? If I just leave it, it's not going to go anywhere. And that's how I manage it. But I can only manage it by accepting that part of myself. I don't think I can. I talk about it in so many things. I talk about the desire to lose weight with the black and white thinking. I didn't see it as getting rid of it. I saw like, how do I manage this part of me? Because when I say how do I manage it, I'm accepting that part is there, which to me feels necessary just for that cohesive sense of me and who I am.
Right. So if you are dieting, perhaps you're still in the pursuit of denying. Like there's still a desire to present something we're not necessarily. Does that make sense?
Well, I think for me with dieting, it always felt more about achievement. I never felt like I was denying myself.
Okay.
When I was in any kind of restriction stage, because I don't think I did as much restriction as some other people might do and might have done. So for me, anytime I was in the restriction stage, that was, even when it came to an end, it didn't normally come to an end because I was conscious of feeling deprived. It was not a conscious thing. It was usually just something, I don't even know now, kind of feels like a bit of a blur.
And sometimes it does, right? I'm like,
something happened. Like that switch from restricting into binging used to just seem to sort of sneak up on me. Like, I don't even know. It start with a thought about something and like a sense of, then the justification for having the thing because of, the restricting I'd done so far, and that mental game, that mental battle. It wasn't even a battle, it was more like this conversation. Then I would have the food that I had justified in my mind, in my restrictive mind. I found a way to justify it. Then I think, I've blown it.
Yeah.
Who are you on the other side of your disordered eating? What's different about you?
Well, nothing is drastically different. It's just that there's magnifications and whatever the opposite of that is.
Minifications?
Minifications.
Uh-huh.
Um, so there was always a side of me that was, um, hmm. I think there was always a side of me that was, I don't want to use this word. I don't like it. Is there a better word than determined? I'm very passionate about things that I have a great interest in, and I will pursue them and make them into something. And I think this was something that I always had as a part of me, but it was a side of myself that I gave no credit to because of other things that I learned about myself or believed about myself, that I was weak and that I was too emotional and that I was too feminine, that I was not strong enough to be a leader or an entrepreneur even, that I could do something that I made, that wasn't something I felt was mine to hold. So parts of my personality got pushed away because I just believed that they needed to be, and that's how my identity was made. So when I stopped dieting, I actually, in that surrender of beliefs in general, or just in like opening up to the fact that I don't know it all, um, it allowed for things to start coming into my life, and it allowed for me to start setting boundaries with people and thoughts about who I was and how people could speak to me or how people's opinions of me would impact my opinions of me. I started setting boundaries there. And as I did that, I started opening up to what my natural instincts were, my natural inclinations were. We've talked before about creativity, and that was a huge thing that came into my life at that time that I had stifled because I thought that was a very, um, I keep using the word flighty. It was like this like silly part of myself that wouldn't amount to anything. So when dieting fell by the wayside, which was this effort to be a more streamlined identity of what I thought I should be. It was me taking my good parts and trying to make them as big as I could to the neglect of other parts. When dieting left, it was like, okay, well, I'm just all these things, they're all in a big pile, and I'm going to start to pick them up and see which ones still resonate with who I am, and also maybe turn the light on some of them and see if some of them are just who I am, but it's not so bad, or if I could use it this way. So, for example, when I started doing this, I was someone who would have, I think, before only started perfectly, or, which of course we never get there, but I would have started with a brand and with a this and with a that and with a knowing all my posts would have been planned. And instead it was like, I'm just going to start talking in my closet to whoever wants to listen to me. And I'm going to muddle through my words, and I'm going to post whatever I'm thinking of that morning, whatever I have time for. And it started like that, where I just started doing things because I was like, this is what I want to do. It's me. And here I go. And slowly learning to trust that and trust these parts of myself that were there in their imperfect forms, and realizing that that was helping me, like that just being able to express myself day to day for who I really was without it looking polished was helpful. And it was easy, it was sustainable because it was really who I was. And then I started to learn about how you could actually run a business and be impulsive and be someone who doesn't necessarily do things by the book, where it's like, oh, great, that's a lot of good permission, because that's what I need. And the more that I started leaning into that whole idea of being who I was and that could work for me, um, the more I felt myself and the more I gave my permission to be myself. So now, I'm still all sorts of things, but I think that I'm stronger than I ever believed that I was. And I mean that not in a cliche way, but just I feel more resilient. I feel like I can trust myself. I feel like I know how to take care of myself better. And that when I don't, I also know how to handle that
Mhm,
better.
mhm.
And that I fall apart sometimes. Like I still do, and I probably always will. And that's something I also like, okay, that's going to be part of me.
Mhm. My whole story for years was always that I wasn't consistent. I never stick at anything. That was always my story. I would get these grand ideas of these big projects or things I might want to do, and they would just fall apart. And I say fall apart, I would just stop doing them. I would lose interest once that initial motivation and flush of excitement was gone. I just couldn't motivate myself to do anything. And it started, and I probably talked about this on the exercise episode. It started with just doing like a couple of sun salutations a day on the yoga mat. It was like 5 minutes of yoga a day, but I started to do it consistently. And for the longest time, I kept using that as evidence that I could do something consistently, and my meditation practice as well. Once I'd got them as a routine, it gave me so much. It opened up another possibility. It challenged my identity as someone who never sticks at anything, because that was how I saw it. I never stick at anything. But, then I did my therapy training. And of course, I stuck at that for 7 years, or however, 6, 7 years. So I can now, and there's still part of me that can get excited about something and start it and stop it. But I've now got enough evidence to say, yeah, that's part of me. And there's also part of me that is capable of consistency. The other thing that I think has really shifted my worldview, which means it's shifted me, is the belief that peace is always available to me if I'm willing to surrender to the thing that I can't control. And the key bit is obviously if I'm willing, because I'm not always. Sometimes I'm determined that I know better than life. But it's always available to me. Like I know that if I just let go, I can feel some calmness, and I can feel some of that peace that I want. And that, I think, was the real life changing part of the whole recovery journey, and what struggling with food actually enabled me to discover and realize. And it's one of the sort of key messages of my book as well. It's around this idea of letting go of that inner conflict, because that's what surrender does, is it gets rid of the inner conflict. But I'm a human being, and I get myself into conflict again and again, but I can see how I perpetuate it. And that's actually incredibly empowering, because it makes me it gives me some sense, some idea that no matter what life throws at me, that I could find a way to find peace in that. I don't know if it's true. And I feel like even saying that is tempting fate to go like, here you go, have this. Let's see how you manage with that. But sometimes I play out the most terrible scenarios, which I wouldn't even share on the podcast, and be like, could I find a way to make peace in that scenario?
Yeah.
And like, hypothetically, I'm always like, yeah, I'll find a way to peace. If I lose the ability to walk, I'll find a way to make purpose out of that, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Which it takes off some of the panic of living in a world of which there's a lot, majority is out of my control.
Yeah. I like that word capable. I really resonate with feeling capable. And that feels like something that it's a really solid thing to feel. Like when you feel capable, and maybe that's so many of us don't. Especially coming from where dieting is almost you're bound to end up feeling like you can't do it. Like, why doesn't it work? What's wrong with me? It chips away at your sense of feeling capable. And that when dieting goes, when it's like, I'm not doing this anymore, I'm not going to seek my capability there, then there is this emptiness of like, where do I find, if I haven't cultivated it anywhere else, then I don't feel like I am capable. And I feel like maybe another word that comes up a lot is boring. I'm boring now. I have no passion anymore. Like if it's just me, now I'm this like non-capable, boring person, and I don't even know what I'm interested in anymore. And it's kind of like I've stopped binging, and I thought this would be so great, but now I feel like I don't know what to do with my time. I don't know what to do with my thoughts. I don't know what to do with I don't even have any passion anymore. I don't know how I feel about this. And that's another, I always, when clients get to that point, I always feel like, I mean, I know that feels really hollow, but it also is like, okay, we're at the next tier here. That's a great thing that we're not binging anymore. Like that's something that you always wanted, right? Like this is where you thought, and then it's like, okay, now we deal with this next layer of who are we now? How do we rebuild from here?
Mm. But using that word capable in the way that I was hearing it when you were talking then, it sounded like that longing for something outside of us to make us feel capable, to be capable at doing, this whole idea that life is about what you do. And I feel that for me anyway, the first step was becoming, before any of my behavior changed, while I was still binge eating, like nothing was changing out there, becoming more capable of of influencing, I want to say influencing because choosing feels too rigid, influencing my response to
Mhm.
something, having some choice over how I was going to talk to myself about it, how I was going to frame it, whether I was willing to let go of what's just happened that I can't change, developing the capability to do that. And it feels like a lifelong thing, learning to, become more capable of that. That had to happen first before that could translate into any sense of
Yeah.
capability of behavioral change.
Yeah. No, when I say capable, I mean it here. Like there's a feeling of being capable. And I think you're right. I think it starts in the process. When you realize you have more influence over your choices and your beliefs and your responses to food stuff and to beliefs about your body or whatever it is, that is part of that building of resilience and capability and of the sense you have of yourself of being able to do that. I think that's part of this. I think that the process of the recovery itself empowers in a way that might seem a lot more subtle because you're not getting the external, you're not landing in the body, you don't have this physical thing that's the result, that's the end game. It's much more quiet and it happens all in here and no one can see it, but you can feel it. And I think sometimes paying attention to that, to the feelings that you're getting access to of your own making, because you can choose differently, that you have more choice, that's part of the empowerment process itself.
Yes, 100%. I often said, from my perspective now, and it's easy to say it from my perspective now,
Yeah.
I am really thankful for my binge eating struggles. Like, I am so grateful for having gone through that.
Mm.
Everybody now who's struggling is going, shut up, Sarah, just shut up. I'm not grateful for any of this. But again, it was another reframe. And I was even able to feel that gratitude before the behavior changed.
Hmm. Really?
Yeah.
I was not. I can't say that's true for me. Tell me about it.
Because the part, well, as I was starting to shift, like how I was feeling, and I wouldn't have been doing any of this work if it were not for that. So what I found is the work that I was doing with food was translating in other areas of my life. So when I was practicing this, choosing my response to my distress around my eating, I was able to choose my response to another situation that was going on somewhere in my life. It made me feel, through the development during recovery, I began to feel more capable of trusting myself and finding balance with food. That we talk about the parallels, trusting myself and finding more balance in other areas of my life as well. Like it all had
Hmm.
this positive impact.
Yeah. Where that's hard, I think for anyone listening who's like in the thick of the binges or the dieting cycle, before you feel capable, you feel horrible. You feel desperate. And it's like one thing to listen to us or someone else, anyone who's been through recovery has seen any sort of other side of it and think, and I get it. I get how you could say that, seeing as what your experience has been. But I feel like someone who may never come out of this, like this might be my life pattern. And in that sense, what do you grab then? What do you grab when you're in the place of never having any slight feeling at all of capability inside or having the power of choice or of the influencing your ability to respond? If you feel like that's not accessible, then how do you use it to help motivate? Like how do you even know where to go? What do you do then?
I think it would start with opening up yourself to that it's possible. Because for as long as you believe it's not possible at all for you to choose your response at all, that's always going to be your reality. And that doesn't mean that you know how, and there might be some
Mhm.
frustration in that, and there might be doubt. Oh, that's fine. Doubt leaves some wiggle room, right? But it's
Yeah.
that idea that, okay, this is what some other people are saying they've done and seems to be working. Okay, well, I feel like I've been struggling and my experience is different to theirs, of course. But is it possible for me? What would that even begin to look like? How would I want to be able to talk to myself afterwards? And one of the questions I think I shared on the self-compassion episode, I feel like that is the starting point for a lot of people, is to have a bit more compassion for this problem. Otherwise, the catastrophization is going to keep dragging you down and clouding your perception. Is coming back to that question even afterwards when you're in that distressed state of shame, that question, what is the kindest way of looking at the situation? That still feels true. So it's not saying this is okay. It's not saying this is a learning thing. It's not saying anything that doesn't feel true. It can be, I'm disappointed. I feel like I've messed up again and I'm feeling lost. That still might be better than your usual well worn out tape of, I'm disgusting, I'm a complete failure, oh my goodness, what's wrong with me, I'm full of shame, all those other things like that. I think it starts with questions, because I think that's how we shift our perspective, is through asking ourselves some good questions.
So I'm going to throw myself back 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. Listening. Okay, but every time I give myself the hope of I can choose, or I can meet myself, or I have some capability, I just end up binging. And I've proven it to myself over and over and over again, and it doesn't change. So what you're saying is to offer myself some kind of compassion, but nothing is changing. And I've actually been proving to myself that I can't, and that I can't actually trust myself ever. I think this would be the pattern in my head.
Yeah. Is there a willingness to feel better first? Because if you're dependent on your behavior changing in order to feel better about yourself, what's going to happen is you'll use the shame, as we've talked about before, to motivate yourself, to force yourself into some behavioral changes. And then it's completely, your whole sense of self-worth and okayness becomes hooked back onto how you're eating again. So it starts with that willingness, and also the black and white thinking on that willingness to challenge this belief that you may have. My behavior has to change. My body has to change before I'm willing to give myself the tiniest break and to just cast a bit of doubt on that. Maybe it's that belief that's keeping you stuck where you are. Maybe it's that belief that's blocking you from even being able to do this, and allowing the question to just be like, what if these things that I've believed are not true? That, I think, is that's where we start.
Yeah, I fully agree. And I'm throwing back to when we said that you get emotionally invested in your position, because all I'm feeling now is like that there is there's that feeling of like, no, no, I want to stay here, and self-loathing. There's no way I'm accepting myself differently. And that's again, this is part of reflect back on the all or nothing episode too, as far as I think that being in that space and looking at that thought pattern, and then moving into more flexibility, more openness on that. And when we believe it's almost like we believe that we're only worthy of the flexibility if we're doing well. Like then we can offer it to ourselves. But if we're disgusted at our own behavior, then we're going to stay in this tight ball because we don't deserve that flexibility. Whew, yeah.
This is a big subject, and I think we've covered quite a lot, but there's probably a lot more that we could say about this, but we're probably going to have to wrap it up there for today. So thank you, Steph, for this conversation.
Thanks, Sarah, for having it with me. And thanks, everybody, for being here as well. We'll see you again next week.
See you next week. I was going to hit end then. I didn't want to hit end. I want to stop recording. I don't think you were recording again. I looked over. You weren't recording.
I know.
About halfway through.